If I asked you what Panama does for a living, you'd probably answer in one word: the canal. A ditch cut through the jungle that the world's ships line up to pay for. Hold on to that, because the real numbers tell a stranger story. The canal is worth about 3% of Panama's economy directly, and somewhere near 8% once you count every knock-on effect. By the usual measure of what a country lives on, the ditch is a small part of it. And yet, it hands the government more than 20% of everything it collects, and last year alone delivered almost $3 billion to the treasury. The canal doesn't really run Panama's economy, it runs Panama's state. What Panama actually sells is harder to see. It sells passage. Ships pay to cross it, goods pass through its warehouses, more than 8,000 vessels around the world fly its flag, and for decades, other people's money passed quietly through its law firms. The entire country is a toll booth on the global economy. So how did a nation of 4 million people end up owning the most valuable shortcut on Earth? Why does the world's most important trade route depend on rainfall? And now that Washington and Beijing are fighting over it, what happens to a country whose whole business is letting other people through? Let's deconstruct it. To understand what Panama sells, you have to start with a fairly brutal fact. For most of its history, it didn't own the thing that made it valuable, and the way it lost it explains almost everything about how the country behaves today, including why the last 12 months have hit such a nerve. The French went first. In 1881, Ferdinand de Lesseps arrived in Panama, the man who had built the Suez Canal, world famous, and completely certain he could do it again. He couldn't. 8 years later, his company collapsed into bankruptcy, having burned through $287 million and lost around 22,000 lives, most of them to yellow fever and malaria. Then Washington took an interest. The United States wanted the route, but Panama was a province of Colombia, and the Colombian Senate rejected the deal on the table as an insult to its sovereignty. So in November 1903, American warships appeared off the coast. Panama declared independence, and the United States recognized the new country 3 days later. And this is the part I had to read twice. The treaty that handed America the Canal Zone in perpetuity was signed for Panama by a Frenchman. Philippe Bunau-Varilla had been an engineer on the failed French project and held shares in the company that stood to collect $40 million from the sale. He negotiated on behalf of a country barely 2 weeks old. No Panamanian signed it. The canal opened in 1914, dug largely by laborers from Barbados, Martinique, and Guadeloupe, thousands of whom died doing it. For the next 85 years, a strip of territory 500 square miles wide ran through the middle of Panama flying a foreign flag. Panama had a country. America had the corridor through it. So the obvious question is, how Panama ever got it back? And this matters more than it sounds, because every dollar Panama earns today rests on a handover that almost nobody at the time believed would work. Resentment built for decades, and it turned violent in 1964, when riots over the right to fly the Panamanian flag inside the zone left more than 20 people dead. 13 years after that, Jimmy Carter and General Omar Torrijos signed the treaties that finally set a date on American control. The road there stayed ugly. The United States invaded in 1989 to remove Manuel Noriega, a man it had spent years paying. But on the 31st of December 1999, the canal became Panamanian. Almost everyone expected them to wreck it. The confident prediction was that a small country with a shaky political history would let the locks decay and watch the traffic drift elsewhere. Instead, Panama built the Canal Authority as an autonomous body, run as a business and required by the Constitution to hand its surplus to the state. Then, in 2016, it finished a $5 billion expansion, a third lane of locks, wide enough for ships carrying 3 times the old load. The results settled the argument fairly comprehensively. Since the handover, the canal has paid more than $29 billion into Panama's treasury. In the last financial year alone, it delivered almost $3 billion, making it the single largest source of money the Panamanian government has. But if you stop there, you'd walk away believing Panama lives off the canal. And that's where this gets genuinely interesting. The ditch is the most visible part of a much bigger business, and the rest of that business is the part that actually made Panama rich. Miss it, and you'll misread everything that happens next. If you're finding this one interesting, a quick subscribe means the next breakdown lands in your feed. Anyway, services make up around 80% of Panama's economy, and almost all of them are versions of the same idea. Start with the ships. Panama runs the largest ship registry on Earth, over 8,000 vessels, roughly 16% of the world's merchant tonnage. And most of them will never call at a Panamanian port. Registration is cheap, international shipping income goes untaxed, and there's no requirement to hire Panamanian crews. A Greek owner with a Japanese-built ship and a Filipino crew flies Panama's flag because it is the most convenient nationality money can buy. Then Cologne, at the Atlantic mouth, home to the second largest free trade zone in the world after Hong Kong, a warehouse city where goods are landed, stored, repackaged, and sent onward without ever formally entering a country. And then the money. Panama has used the US dollar since 1904 and built a banking and legal industry on top of it that taxed only what was earned on Panamanian soil, which touches you more directly than you'd think. The electronics, the shoes, the coffee in your kitchen. There's a decent chance the ship that carried them flew Panama's flag, and a better chance that flag was among the cheapest line items in the whole journey. You have been paying Panama a fraction of a cent for years without knowing it. And in 2016, the last part of that model got dragged into the light. 11.5 million documents leaked from a Panamanian law firm called Mossack Fonseca, and the Panama Papers showed the world exactly what that offshore industry had been doing quietly for decades. Ships, goods, money. Panama had turned being the place things pass through into a national business model. And all of it rests on something no amount of engineering can guarantee. The canal has a weakness most people never think about. And in 2023, it stopped being theoretical and started costing real money, including, quite possibly, some of yours. The canal works by lifting ships 85 feet up into an artificial lake, carrying them across the isthmus and lowering them down the other side. That lake, Gatun, is filled by rain. It is the only major shipping choke point on Earth running on fresh water rather than seawater, and every crossing spills around 50 million gallons of it into the ocean, gone for good. One ship uses about as much fresh water as 500,000 Panamanians drink in a day, 30-odd times a day. And that same lake supplies drinking water for more than half the country. Then El Niño arrived. Through 2023 and into 2024, the rains failed. Gatun fell to its lowest January level on record, and the Canal Authority found itself rationing global trade. Daily crossings were cut from around 38 to 24, then to 22. At one point, more than 160 ships sat at anchor waiting for a slot. Monthly transits collapsed to 189 in January 2024, down from 283 a year earlier. Shipping lines paid enormous sums at auction to jump the queue, or gave up and sailed the long way round. Panama's answer is a new reservoir on the Rio Indio, $1.6 billion. Construction beginning in 2027, finished no earlier than 2032. And it means flooding land where people currently live. Whether that's enough is the thing I genuinely can't tell you. It's built for the droughts we have already seen. Nobody I read will say with confidence what the rainfall over this watershed looks like in 2040. And Panama is effectively betting its national budget on that answer. The rains did come back. By last year, the canal was running 33 crossings a day again and posting record revenue. But the lesson stands, and everyone in shipping absorbed it. The most important shortcut in global trade runs on weather. Which brings us to the other problem with owning something the world can't manage without. Other people start to feel entitled to it. Over the last year, that stopped being rhetoric and turned into one of the sharpest confrontations of the US-China rivalry, with 4 million Panamanians standing in the middle of it. In January 2025, days into his second term, Donald Trump announced that China was operating the Panama Canal, that America had given it to Panama rather than to Beijing, and that the United States was taking it back. Marco Rubio's first foreign trip as Secretary of State was to Panama City. The claim rested on a real fact. A Hong Kong company, CK Hutchison, had operated the ports at both ends of the canal since 1997. What followed was remarkable. In March 2025, under heavy American pressure, CK Hutchison agreed to sell its entire non-Chinese ports portfolio, 43 ports, $23 billion, to a consortium led by BlackRock. Beijing called that kowtowing and stalled the deal. Then, in January 2026, Panama's own Supreme Court ruled the port concession had been unconstitutional all along, and the government handed interim control to Maersk and MSC. China warned Panama would inevitably pay a heavy price, and Hutchison launched international arbitration seeking extensive damages. Now, I'll be straight about where I land, because I think both sides of this got something wrong. The claim that China was operating the canal was false. The canal is run by the Panama Canal Authority, and operating 2 ports at either end of a waterway is not the same thing as controlling the waterway. But the Panamanian line, that this was purely a domestic legal matter decided on the constitutional merits, doesn't survive the timeline. A concession that stood for 28 years was found unconstitutional 12 months after an American president demanded exactly that outcome. Both things can be true at once, and Panama has to live inside both. On paper, the canal is neutral, open to every nation on equal terms. What the last year demonstrated is that neutrality has an edge to it, and the edge sits roughly where the interests begin of the country that sends 40% of America's container traffic through your locks. Panama's response is to build more of the same, only owned outright. State-run port terminals, so the concessions can't be used as leverage again. A gas pipeline across the isthmus, so fuel cargo doesn't spend the lake's water. A land bridge to move containers without filling a single lock. Each of those is another way of selling passage while owning a little more of it. So here's where I land. Panama isn't really a country that lives off a ditch. It's a country that turned its own geography into a toll booth, and then spent a century finding out what that costs. The canal made it the wealthiest state in Central America. It also made it permanently interesting to people far more powerful than it is, and permanently dependent on rain it cannot summon. And that's the part I keep coming back to, my friends. Charging the world to pass through you is a wonderful business, right up until you notice that you don't own the traffic, you don't own the weather, and the people paying the toll have strong opinions about who gets to collect it. Panama got its canal back in 1999. The last 2 years have been a slow lesson in what the word back was ever worth. Panama's whole story is a small country that worked out how to charge the world for passing through it. Ships, goods, and for a long time, other people's money too. But there's another small country that ran that last part of the play on its own, and ran it far harder, with no canal and no ports to help it. Its whole lever was a tax rate, and a legal structure that made it the address where the world's biggest companies booked their profits. It pulled tens of billions away from economies far larger than itself, enough that France and Germany accused it of stealing their jobs, and the European Commission ordered a single American company to hand it 13 billion euros in back taxes. A windfall that country then went to court to refuse. That's Ireland, and the video breaks down exactly how the trick worked, who paid for it, and why it's falling apart right now. It's on the channel.